The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Before they tell you what to think, let me show you what's actually happening. I'm Henry Fox, and on this channel we don't follow the noise, we decode it. What you just heard was Richard Nixon, August 15th, 1971. And in that 20-minute speech, he quietly changed how the entire world works with money. But most people have no idea what he actually set in motion. So today we decode it. Before we talk about the petrodollar, we need to go back. After World War II, 44 countries met in a small town called Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The question on the table was simple. How do we stop another Great Depression? Their solution: tie every country's currency to the US dollar and tie the US dollar to gold, fixed at $35 per ounce. For 25 years, it worked. Trade exploded. Europe recovered. Japan rebuilt. But then cracks appeared. America was spending massively, funding the Vietnam War and a sweeping domestic spending program at the same time. Too many dollars were flooding the world. Countries started redeeming those dollars for gold, and America's gold reserves started bleeding out. By 1971, Nixon had a choice: cut spending or cut the gold. He cut the gold. On August 15th, 1971, the dollar was detached from gold forever. The world moved from a gold-backed system to a trust-backed system, and suddenly, the dollar was just paper, which created one terrifying question. If the dollar isn't backed by gold anymore, why should the world need it? Nixon had handed the problem to Henry Kissinger, and Kissinger didn't try to fix what was broken. He replaced it with something more powerful. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War broke out. Arab oil-producing countries cut off oil exports to the United States and its allies. Oil prices nearly quadrupled. The world economy shook. But Kissinger saw something in the chaos. If America couldn't back the dollar with gold, maybe it could back it with something the entire world desperately needed: oil. In 1974, the United States and Saudi Arabia quietly reached a historic arrangement. Not one single signed treaty, but a web of agreements that changed everything. America will provide Saudi Arabia with military protection and weapons. In return, Saudi Arabia would price its oil in US dollars and recycle those oil profits back into America by buying US government bonds. Because Saudi Arabia was OPEC's most powerful voice, the rest of the oil world followed. And just like that, the petrodollar was born. The dollar had found a new anchor. Not gold, oil. Before I continue the decode, if you're finding this valuable, do me a quick favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when a new pattern drops. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps more people find content that actually explains how the world works. Alright, back to it. Here's where it gets interesting, because this is where most people stop understanding. Think about what any country on earth has to do just to buy oil. First, you have to earn or acquire US dollars. Then, you keep those dollar reserves ready in your central bank. Then, you use those dollars to purchase the oil. And if you want to stay in the global trading system, you also hold US assets to back your own currency. That's 4 steps, just to buy energy. And every single one of them runs through the dollar. Now here's the other side of the cycle. The part that made America untouchable. The oil exporting countries, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, are sitting on billions and billions of dollars. What do they do with all that money? They don't just let it sit. They reinvest it directly back into the United States economy. How exactly? They buy US Treasury bonds, essentially lending money straight to the American government. They buy US real estate, commercial properties, developments, entire city blocks. They purchase American stocks and financial assets. So the money that left America to buy oil comes right back to America as investment. The cycle looks like this. The world earns dollars, uses dollars to buy oil. Oil nations collect those dollars. Oil nations reinvest back into America. America stays funded. The dollar stays dominant. And the whole thing repeats forever. A French finance minister in the 1960s called this America's exorbitant privilege. And he was absolutely right. America could borrow more cheaply than any nation on earth, run bigger deficits than anyone, and print money in ways that would collapse any other currency because the world constantly needed dollars. So America always had room to maneuver. But there was one more weapon hidden inside the system. Because global transactions ran through the dollar, America gained the power to cut entire countries off from the world economy. Sanctions. The dollar didn't just become a currency. It became a geopolitical weapon. After losing gold, America didn't lose power. It built something far more powerful. But here's the question nobody was asking. What happens when the countries feeding the cycle start looking for a way out? Because that's exactly what began to happen. In 2024, social media exploded with the claim that Saudi Arabia had officially ended the Petrodollar agreement. Here's what's true and what isn't. There was never a single formal treaty with an expiration date, but there was a real historical arrangement, a quiet understanding built over decades, where Saudi Arabia priced oil in dollars, recycled profits into American assets, and in return received American military protection and security guarantees. That arrangement held for 50 years. So what changed? 3 things, and they all happened at the same time. First, the customer changed. China is now Saudi Arabia's biggest oil customer, not America. When your biggest buyer is no longer paying in dollars, the entire logic of dollar-only pricing starts to break down. Why lock yourself to one currency when your most important relationship runs through a different one? Second, the protection changed. America's military presence and influence in the Middle East has been shifting. Saudi Arabia watched what happened to countries that depended entirely on American support and started asking how long that guarantee would hold. They began building new relationships with China, with Russia, with regional powers, to avoid being fully dependent on one protector. Third, the sanctions lessened. When America froze Russia out of the dollar system in 2022, every country in the world took note, Saudi Arabia included. They saw how quickly a country could be cut off from the global financial system, and they started quietly building exits. In 2023, Saudi Arabia and China signed a multi-billion-dollar currency swap agreement. In 2024, Saudi Arabia joined mBridge, a blockchain-based payment network that lets countries settle oil trades directly in their own currencies, completely bypassing the dollar. And the dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has quietly dropped from 71% in 1999 to around 57% today. This is not Saudi Arabia declaring war on the dollar. It is Saudi Arabia making sure it is never fully at the mercy of one system. The dollar isn't collapsing, but its monopoly, the idea that there's no alternative, is being quietly dismantled. For 50 years, the world had one financial center. Now, multiple centers are beginning to emerge, which brings us to the biggest question of all. So if the petrodollar weakens, what replaces it? Here's a surprising answer. Nothing. At least not one single thing. We're not moving from one king to another king. We're moving from one king to many players. Countries have learned the lesson. Depending completely on one currency means being vulnerable to the country that controls it. Russia learned this after Western sanctions cut it off from the dollar system. Iran has known it for decades. Both have been building alternatives with China. Central banks around the world have been buying gold at record levels for 3 consecutive years. Not because gold replaces the dollar tomorrow, but because they want options. The future may look like this. The dollar remains dominant, but no longer unchallenged. The Chinese yuan grows in influence. Gold returns as a reserve anchor. Digital payment networks like mBridge connect it all. And here's the irony that history loves. In 1971, Nixon ended the gold standard to save American power. In 1974, Kissinger tied oil to the dollar to extend that power. 50 years later, the world is quietly building a system where no single nation controls everything. The age of one financial king may be ending. The age of many players has already begun. That's the petrodollar decoded. Gold backed the dollar, then oil backed the dollar. Now, the world is deciding what backs it next. If this changed how you see the global economy, share it. And if you're new here, this is what we do. We don't follow the noise. We decode it. I'm Henry Fox. See you in the next pattern.